Okay, welcome divas and dudes to Powerhouse Bakery. We are in the middle of meal prep in minutes. We've been talking about building our base of really great ingredients so that we can have lots of variety, versatility with the ingredients, as well as when we shop, we have variety in our cart so that when we come home, it becomes really simple on a Tuesday evening of what's for dinner. And so a quick little review, when we think about base ingredients, we want to make sure we've got our best foods list handy. And in that best foods list, we want to think about where is the protein coming from, where are the carbohydrates, and where are the fats. And we know that there's lots of ways we can implement this, right? Protein can be plants. It can also be animal-based. And of course, carbohydrates are not only the starches. What are we thinking about with starches? Like rice and potato, right? Now we are experts, so we know that carbs also are very much a part of the more green family, so veggies, and of course even fruits go into this category. So when we're shopping and we're trying to plan our week, we want to make sure that we don't say, oh, I'm eating low carb. That would be a big mistake, because the carbs are the very important, very lengthy category. And when I show you today our star of the show, which is quinoa, I'm going to talk a little bit about not only its history and for us gardeners, I'm going to even give you some ideas of how to grow it. I can't wait to try that. But it's a 7,000-year-old plant. And how cool is that the genetics of that plant has lasted that many years? So we'll talk a little bit about that. But in general, carbohydrates are not only inexpensive, but they are nutrient powerhouse. So we really want to find out ways to use them more. We'll learn a little bit about how some of the foods that we eat are called complete proteins, and then others are maybe low in some of those amino acids and some are void of certain amino acids. We know that we have 9 essential amino acids that we need to get from this category. There's 21, or some people would say 23 amino acids altogether, but in general we don't have to think so much about the complete proteins as long as we are getting a wide variety of foods. And there are going to be some key things that we want to talk about when we're trying to eat more plants in this category to cover our proteins. So I'll just stay tuned. We'll do a little more discussion on that. The other category of our best foods list, of course, is the fats. And so different types of oils, different kinds of seeds, nuts, and then, of course, cheese and butter and all those animal products that also provide us with some really good sources of fats. And as we talk about those essential amino acids and how we start to really play with a broader scope of foods that we shop for, we're going to find out that things like seeds also provide some of those essential amino acids. So if there's a grain that might be a little low in one, but we're using a lot of seeds and nuts, chances are we are going to be 100% A-OK. In fact, very high chance, very small chance that we're going to be lacking in an amino acid. And so when we think of animal products that are rich in protein, it's fairly easy. Anything that's poultry, like turkey and of course chicken, beef, fish, those are the easy ones. The ones that are maybe a little bit broader would be the animal products, so eggs, and then of course other components of dairy. And so when you're trying to eat more plant-based, sometimes people talk about, well, I'm going to be a lacto-ovo vegetarian. Right? What was that word? Lacto-ovo vegetarian. So a lacto-ovo vegetarian says, okay, when I go shopping, I'm not eating any meat, right? They're a vegetarian. But when we're building our base and we want to make sure that whether we're a vegetarian or a certain type of vegetarian, which might be a lacto-ovo-vegetarian, which means they have milk and eggs, then we can still get a really wide variety of foods. And again, this carbohydrate category becomes super lengthy and super valuable in our decision process. So when we think of plants, we know that they do have amino acids. They just don't have all the same and maybe as high a quality as some of these other products. But eggs and dairy are almost as high as our other components, which would be beef and fish and chicken and turkey. So lacto is for dairy, ovo is egg, and a lacto-ovo vegetarian eats eggs and dairy, even if they consider themselves a vegetarian. Now, what about a vegan? What kind of vegetarian is that? They say, nope, I don't eat any eggs and I don't eat any dairy. So does that mean that they're going to be low in those 9 essential amino acids? And when we're doing our shopping list, that's what's important to know. So if you have kids or grandkids or people that you know that want to be vegan, is it possible to do their shopping and build your base and have a well-rounded nutrition plan without getting as much from this category and just staying in this category? And the answer is sure. You just have to be really smart about what goes in this category. So the seeds and nuts are absolutely fantastic. There's another bean that is also one that I love to talk about that is fantastic in covering all the amino acids, and that's soy. So of course beans and lentils fit in, and they're so happy right here in the middle because they work for everybody. They have protein, they have complex carbohydrates, and they even have a little bit of fats in them. So again, that's why I'm always trying to use and teach ways to have beans and soybeans and lentils. And today, kind of our star of the show is quinoa. And how many think that's a seed versus a cereal? So let's just think about that. If we think of quinoa as our star, I know a lot of you have heard of it. A lot of you are probably using it. How many think it's a seed? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so about half and half. The truth is it really is a seed, but we use it like a grain. And here's an old term. We even kind of call it a cereal, which is weird, right? We think of the old term as a cereal. And so that includes things like wheat, barley, rye, wheat, barley, rye. What would be some other grains or cereals that we think of? Anybody? Amaranth, bulgur, yeah. You know all these. Bulgur, farro, now we're talking. Yeah. So lots of them, right? Oats. Remember I talked when we were doing our meals in minutes for breakfast, and I talked about oats being a really important base to have on your shopping list because it happens to be this fantastic complex carbohydrate that is loaded with protein. So again, it's in that carbohydrate category, but a lot of those grains do have all the amino acids that we need. But the problem is some of them are lower in some than others. So like lysine, I'm not going to get too technical, but there's some essential amino acids that are a little bit more rare. They're not as plentiful in certain grains. And so this one called lysine is one of them. In some grains it's low, and so you have to kind of combine it. And I mentioned this last week a little bit, that what we used to do is say, well, you vegans or vegetarians, but for sure vegans, if you want to make sure you get all your protein, make sure you combine certain things. So rice and beans go together, or lentils and rice, or even soybeans and rice. So that way we're getting all of those maybe lower concentration of those essentials covered. What's really cool though is what we're finding even with quinoa is that we have different growing capabilities, we've been really studying quinoa and are finding that depending on where it's grown, it seems to be doing really well at getting all the essential amino acids. And so I love that growing quality and location is really helping that genome of this very ancient plant get even healthier. So bottom line is, it's a great seed that is kind of like a grain that helps us get all of our essential amino acids. And so when I studied a little bit of the quinoa this morning, anybody know where it originated? South America and Peru, yes. It is 7,000 years old, I mentioned. South America, it was really considered a golden grain. It was very sacred. And I love the fact that we see it as being so valuable. Golden grain. And now, now that it's become so popular in the last decade, it's being grown in lots of places. And it's being studied to make sure that if we give it all the nutrients, it's a very nutrient grain, meaning that it's not as low in some of these essential amino acids as some of the other grains. And of course, the problem with some of these is that people are feeling like they have an allergy to grains. So I'm going to jump over to that for a quick second and talk about why gluten-free is something that has become more popular. So gluten-free has become popular because some people seem to have an allergic reaction to the protein that is in some of these cereals or grains. So we get an allergy to the protein. And so it's not the starch, it's not that it's a carbohydrate that's causing the allergy, it's the protein of that grain. So here we are talking about essential amino acids, and there's actually an allergic response sometimes that people can suffer with. And so we're not exactly sure why it happens to some people and not others, but we seem to see that it gets more pronounced in populations that use a lot of wheat, almost exclusively wheat, and if it's highly processed. So we'll probably learn more and more as we study the gut biome and we study our genetics. We'll be able to understand some more of the answers, but suffice to say that we know it's an allergy. We know that our body has a hypersensitive reaction. That's what an allergy is. So it's being hypersensitized by the proteins in this grain. And we decided at Powerhouse Bakery to be all gluten-free, but I always tell people you don't have to have celiac disease to enjoy what we do here, because really what we want to do is teach people to have a wide variety. If we're pretty sure that an allergic response happens when we eat the same thing over and over and over, wouldn't it make sense to get a broader scope of our base foods and really learning how to apply some of these wonderful techniques so that we can enjoy quinoa and other seeds, so amaranth and bulgur, and of course, there's several others, teff. So experiment with these, not just because you know somebody that has to eat gluten-free, but instead because we want a wider variety of those essential amino acids. We want to make sure that we get the benefits of all those plant-based proteins. And so when we look a little deeper into the whole idea around quinoa, that what makes it so important is the secondary metabolites. So if we think of why do we eat carbohydrates, we get energy from them. The secondary metabolites means, it has something else that benefits me. When we think of a nutrition facts label, does it tell us anything about secondary metabolites? Heck no. No, that's way too complicated for the average. But we diva and dudes, we are above average in our nutrition intelligence. And so that's why I want you to kind of see, when we think of flavonoids, have you ever heard of that term? Mm-hmm. Of course, because you've been here. And I talk about antioxidants. And so if we think of the big category of antioxidants, flavonoids are one of them. And we've heard of phytoestrogens and antioxidants and lots of those terms. Quinoa is high in quercetin, C-E-T, quercetin. Okay, so quercetin, and here's another one. I don't even write this one very much. It's camphorol. So C-A-E-M-P-F-E-R-O-L. camphorol. So next time you're at a dinner party and you want to show off, tell them about the important flavonoids in the quinoa, quercetin and camphorol. And I think it's important for us to understand the fact that the nutrition label gives us such a tiny window into what we're really getting from our food. If we were to look at the nutrition facts label, Mary, could you hand me a little rag to wipe? I forgot one. A little towel to wipe. When we look at the nutrition facts panel and it tells us what quinoa has in it, it's kind of like a ho-hum. It's like, gosh, it has a lot of calories. I know you're going to think that when I write it down as soon as she gives me an eraser. It has calories, it has protein, it has fat, it has lots of carbs. And so on first glance, thank you, ma'am. On first glance, we think, well, gosh, is that going to make me fat? Right? Am I going to eat quinoa and get fat because of what it's telling me in the nutrition facts panel? And that is a resounding no, because there's so much more to excess calories being stored in as fat than just what the nutrition label says. So I wrote down what 1 cup of quinoa is as far as the nutrition facts label, okay? So then we're going to talk about the 193 secondary metabolites. All right, there's what you get to talk about when you're at your dinner party and you're going to brag about all the things that you're offering in this quinoa dish. But the nutrition label says it has 220 calories. It has 3.5 grams of fat, 5 grams of fiber. Here we go, whopping 39 grams of carbs. That's when everybody goes, oh, I'm not going to eat that. That's fattening, right? 8 grams of protein. And even when I have diabetics come in here and they say, well, what can I eat? I'm a diabetic. Would I have them eat quinoa? Oh, you bet. You bet I would. We have many vegans that are diabetic, type 1 diabetics, that do phenomenally well when they are vegan, eating all from that center and secondary category. So taking out protein as animal, instead getting carbs and fats, right? And they do great. Why is that? Well, because of all these other things that are going on that the label does not adequately share. In fact, let me take it to another level. 1 cup of quinoa, when we look at the USRDA, for nutrients, this is when the US government says, okay, citizens, we think that for an average person that follows a 2,000 calorie diet, we're going to tell you how much nutrients you should have in that diet, okay? So based on that information, 1 cup of quinoa gives us 19% of our folate. It gives us 13% of our B6. What does B6 do? Anybody want to guess? It's a cofactor for energy production. Anything that's a B vitamin helps your body bring energy into the cells. Okay, and then 8% of vitamin E. And it didn't even have any nuts or seeds in it yet. So imagine when we dress it up, right? And then it has 18% of zinc. That's huge. Where do we oftentimes get zinc? Well, from our animal products. Anybody going to say something where you can get zinc? Don't tell me from your multivitamin. Yeah. Phosphorus, 22%. See, I mean, this is pretty impressive. Again, for 220 calories, look at all you're getting. That's what we call a powerhouse of nutrition. For 220 calories, that's awesome. Here's an even better. Iron. It's very hard for young women to get enough iron. And this is giving us 15% of our daily requirement of iron. Which one am I missing? Magnesium, 7%. 7%. And I think that's all of them. Okay, and then, so look at this. I mean, we've got a lot of nutrients in our 220 calories. So, you know, if we think of 220 calories as being a fraction of our calorie needs for the day, every calorie is bringing us lots of bang for our buck. And so that, I think, is the takeaway for 1 cup of quinoa. And that's, again, before we've even dressed it up. I mentioned this a little earlier about the amino acids, and the metabolites. So the metabolites are looking at what does our body do with this seed after we digest it. Yes, we're going to get some vitamins and minerals. We're going to get some macronutrients, but the metabolites are those acids that our gut biome likes. So if you listen to the talk that we did about the gut biome, and there's certain byproducts that the biome really nourishes or gets its nourishment from, this is what we're talking about, those metabolites. And then as an aside, when we talked about quinoa being grown, we are able to really look at how rich this grain is in all different parts of the world. And so, curing world hunger, quinoa can be part of that. And so it's kind of cool when we realize that it's very versatile. It can tolerate drought very well. It's a cool weather crop, which I don't know, South Texas, maybe we're going to have to find a big oak tree to plant it under. But it's also very resistant to soil weaknesses. It still maintains its integrity. So to me, that's just it's so exciting that we have so much with quinoa. And so what I'm going to do is show you a couple of different ways to prepare quinoa. And the basic cooking instructions are so simple. And I say that, and probably every one of my staff, maybe even me, has burnt it once or twice, right, guys? And it's because the size of the vesicle is important. If you have a big pot and you put just a little bit of water and stuff and grain in it, it's going to boil away fast. The chamber size really does matter. So just like with rice, if you put water and a grain in and it didn't have a tight fitting lid and it had a very large capacity with a small amount of product, it boils away really fast. So the size of the container matters. And I did have a request last week to maybe even talk about tools of the trade and kitchen equipment. So I might do that with us because I think it would be really fun to bring that up. So in general, it's a 2-to-1 ratio. When you cook quinoa, it's going to be 1 cup of the grain or the seed, call it whatever you want, and 2 cups of water. Simple, but don't use a very large container. So like if my team, we have a certain pot I always teach them to use and a certain ratio, and someone will say, oh, I'm going to save, I'm just going to make a half batch. And they use the same big container and make a half batch, it burns. It's so funny, but that's my trick of the trade. So in your kitchen, it shouldn't matter as much because you're probably not going to make 14 cups of something and then cut it down to 7 cups, right? But the idea is important. Get a really good quality stock pot that's maybe a 4-quart, and then making sure that you watch your heat and you know the temperatures really well so that you don't let it burn, because you ruin the seeds so fast if they burn. So 2-to-1, and then the rest is how to spice it up. So you know me, bay leaves. I love a bay. And I love spices and salt, maybe oil, probably not in the very beginning of the cooking phase, but you could. And if you want something pretty versatile, then what I recommend is keep it fairly simple, and that way you can change it around a little bit. But even when we do our quinoa spice, it's so versatile just with that. So in our quinoa spice, I have organic oregano, sage, thyme, garlic powder, paprika, and a little bit of pepper. And then you can add in your own salt. So it's a really nice way to have base flavors. And then, adding in a fresh bay leaf. And so Seema, thank you so much for bringing our bay leaves, because that's going to be so cool. If you are lucky enough to have a friend or you have your own bay plant, let them air dry. If you put them in a tight container, they will mold. So let them air dry before you do put them in some kind of container. That's going to be important.
Well, the other thing I do is I just clean it, dry it, and I freeze it.
Yeah, there you go.
Because it's so strong. Like unlike parsley and cilantro, you can't freeze them. You lose the flavor. But this is thick-skinned. It freezes well.
And I have never done that, but the drying.
I've never done that, but I know it works.
Yeah. Awesome, awesome. Yeah, can certainly be done. Now,
And are they supposed to wash the quinoa as well? Because I tried it without washing it, and I thought, I'm never eating this.
oh,
And then I read the directions, and it said to wash the grain before you cook it.
yeah, you might need to wash the grain first. Nowadays, most producers have it already washed. I hate for you to always wash it because it does weigh it down a little bit. But if your package directions tell you to do that, you probably should. It's kind of like with peas and lentils and some dried beans that they recommend you sort through them and rinse them. It's not a bad idea. Now, when this was a new product on the market, there was a powder that seemed to be on it called saponins, and saponin, saponin. And it was a powder that just sort of happened in the harvesting, and that would make it bitter. But probably more likely at this stage of this crop being more kind of normalized in our stores and our accessibility, it might be that we didn't season it very much, and the flavor of the grain was just bitter. Did you add some flavors to yours? You did.
Yeah, I did, and it was still bitter.
Still bitter. So yeah, it probably was that it had some powder on it. Bob's Red Mill and ancient grains, I think it's called, are pretty nice where you can take them right out of the bag. And nowadays, even at the bakery, we don't rinse ours anymore.
I don't use mine. I just buy the Central Market, the little bags.
Yeah.
They have a lot of variety.
Mm-hmm.
Like that one or just the plain.
Yeah, so you could buy the Central Market brand. So again, finding a brand you feel good about, will probably be all right. Some of the Asian stores or Mid-Eastern stores, they might not have the same production quality. I'm not sure, but this is the one that we use. And so it's got tricolor, so black and red and white seeds, which I just think is absolutely gorgeous. And I would recommend getting the tricolor. I honestly don't know if it's just because I think it's prettier, but my eyes tell me that tastes better. I have had the all black and I've had the all red, and those are great also. But the tricolor is a really nice combination, so use that whenever you can. So basic cooking instructions. Now this is another important thing. Labels might tell you to put it all in at once, and I tell them no. Boil the water, so instructions. Number 1, boil water. Now, of course, you can use broth. Second is add spices. And number 3 is add grain or seeds. Add your quinoa. Number 4 is put on the lid. Reduce heat. And now let it cook for 12 minutes. Okay, cook for 12 minutes. Now this is the hard part for everybody. Make sure that lid is on there and do not take the lid off. Don't check it. Turn your heat way down and really turn on your nose. Be really cognizant if it starts to boil too much, if you don't know your stove very well or your cooktop, save it before it boils dry, because you want a very low simmer for the 12 minutes. And then number 5 is key. Reduce. You're going to take it off the heat. Take off heat and let it sit there. Rest for another 10 minutes. Because this part, it lets it cook really gradually. If you've ever had quinoa that's mushy, you'll never eat it again. So take it off the heat. Don't take off the lid. Don't peek. If you have a glass top, it's really fun because then you can kind of look at it. If you don't see it floating in water, you're A-okay. If there's a little water left, that's probably just fine. Let it sit for 10 to 15 minutes while you do something else on your agenda. And again, this is a little bit of a process, and that's why I do like to make a large batch, and it lasts beautifully, especially if you put some lemon and some olive oil and salt in it. It'll last even longer. So a full week at least in your fridge. Okay? Questions about the cooking process? Use a 2-quart saucepan, I would recommend, or a 4-quart if you're going to make, more than 4 cups. So now let's get to cooking. Okay, so now let me show you what I've got on my table. And remember, meal prep in minutes means that it's midweek, and if you did your shopping well, you can pull stuff out and start creating a nice mix and match. So we've got some completed quinoa, and I'm going to show you how we made that. I've got my water starting to boil, just like on the instructions. I've got my salt. I've got my quinoa spice. And, okay, and here's my grain and a little bit of olive oil. Now, what else I found in my fridge from our shopping trip? I have some beans. And so what I did here was I just mixed 2 different kinds of beans, a little bit of my Suzette and ginger lime dressing, because we always have that in the fridge, right? A little bit of fresh herbs from my garden, so some parsley, and of course my oregano, and then if I had my bay leaves, I would put that in here too. But it's really better to not eat the bay leaf, so it's going to marinate with that. And if you do that on a Monday, gosh, it's going to have some good flavors from the bay leaf. Sometimes I let it stay in the bowl, but you know, if you don't want it to be too strong, you can take out the bay leaf after a few days of sitting there. But this is a great leftover. So have some beans ready to go. And I know I've shown you a recipe for this in some of our past classes. Also in our cooking, our grocery trip, I had cooked off some potato. So remember in our last class, in my little tray, I had the potato, I had butternut squash, and I had, of course, the peppers when we made the sofrito. So we used up the sofrito. We're midweek, and now we have some other good leftovers. So you could also do turnips, which is what I have here. So whether it be potato that I pre-prepped and chopped it up and did a little stir fry because it's already cooked, or the rutabaga and the turnips are a great way to have mix and match. The other item, which will be new, is some roasted beets. So again, everything in your oven at once is so easy. You can do whole beets and just let them roast, or you can chop them and add some olive oil and roast. Don't worry about trying to peel them. That would be just a pain in the booty, and the peel is just fine. So these I did not peel. I just added some olive oil and roasted in our process. The other thing I have is, would you hand me the little tray of the bell peppers? Thank you so much. Thank you, ma'am. Perfect. So these are the peppers that we cooked. Remember, I put everything in and I just cut them in half and took out the seeds. So now I've got so many meals that I can put together. So let me show you a couple of them. So the first thing is with my peppers. Again, I cooked them a week ago, and I'm just going to stuff them with some quinoa. And I'm going to put them in my little my toaster oven over there, because everything's already cooked. So all that's going to do is kind of crisp it up and heat it up. So a nice big scoop into my stuffed pepper. Now, if I wanted to add a little bit of interest and intrigue, I could also add some of my mix-ins. So say I'm going to add some quinoa, and I want to add a little bit of roasted potato, and maybe even some fresh parsley, and some beans. I've got one of my sons coming over, and he's like, "Mom, am I going to get enough protein?" I'm like, "Yeah, honey, no worries. I added beans." Right? And so this becomes a great little blend, and it just changes the personality of the stuffed pepper. So now I can do that little mixture and put it into my second pepper. Could I add some cheese on top? Of course. Could I add some dairy-free cheese if I wanted to? Of course. Or I could add some thick shred Parmesan or some goat cheese. And these look so pretty. Now, here's another hint. When you are roasting and taking the seeds out of your peppers, make sure you leave the stem in place. It helps to hold it together. So notice this little stem is super important. So keep that in place, and that keeps its texture really nice. Okay, you want to put it in the oven for me? Oh, you're the bomb. And then give me that little red tray that you put your, there you are. I'm kind of trapped. You got it. Yay, perfect. Yes, please, just the red container. Perfect. And actually, I'm going to turn it on for you so we can start to smell. This is the air fryer. So it's going to give me air fryer. There we go. I'm going to set it for 6 minutes. All right. So now let me show you what I've done with this other little pepper. So notice with these that I roasted, and I just cut it in half before we started. So look how soft it is. This is the one that I roasted whole. So if it's too mushy, that's okay. We want to still be able to use it. So I'm just going to take out the seeds, and I'm going to chop it and put it into my quinoa. So again, it just gives it a beautiful flavor. It adds color. I could use my sofrito in it as well. Another thing I like is we could do layers. So layers of the peppers and the quinoa and some greens and make like an enchilada. So good. So lots of options there. Now the butternut. Let me show you on this one, because I probably didn't show you last week, and so I'm going to give you a quick little tip. Butternut is fantastic with homemade pesto. So that's what this dark green goodie on top. Who knows how to make pesto? Good, everybody. So it's basil, pine nuts, which you probably have in your grocery list now because we know how to make caponata. So pine nuts are fabulous. What if you're out of pine nuts? What would be another nut you could use in place of it? Sure, pumpkin seeds. I love that, Linda. Sure. We actually use hemp hearts here. Hemp hearts are loaded with nutrients, so I love to have those. And then a little bit of garlic, and you just put it in the food processor, and you can have a beautiful pesto. So this is another dish that I could easily add, but in this one, I'm going to chop it up and add it to my beautiful quinoa. And so I do take the skin off. Notice here I've kind of peeled most of it, but it's actually fine to eat too. Right when it comes out of the oven and it's a little bit crispy, it's so good like that. So now I'm going to chop this. I'm going to add it into my layers. And this will be a beautiful veggie layered dish. I'll go ahead and do some slices. Now don't forget to get some of these Pyrex containers. I love the fact that these can go from the refrigerator to the oven, and you can also freeze with them. So now with my layered veggie lasagna, I'm going to start with the peppers. Now if I want, I could take the whole peel off. When you roast them this way, it comes off very easily. But you really don't have to. So again, I like to make it quick and simple. And if you buy the organic peppers, it's probably a good idea. You know, just to keep them extra healthy whenever you eat the peel. And again, it comes off beautifully. So I'm going to take out the seeds, take off the skin, so it peels right off. And in goes my layers. Next layer is going to be the quinoa. Yeah. It just comes right off. I was just peeling it with my fingers. Oh, why? Sometimes it's a little tough, but it's definitely not obligatory. Definitely not. All right. So now here's my start of my layers. I've got pepper and I have quinoa, and I'm going to do some greens. You could do baby spinach. I love cooked arugula, so I'm going to layer that in. I could put a little layer of cheese if I wanted to. I could put some hummus in there. So much fun. Sky's the limit. And on the very last layer, I would go ahead and put peppers again so that it gives it a nice compact look. So really fun, easy way to try your veggie layer. Now my water's boiling, so I'm going to add in my quinoa and all my yummies. So this is 4 cups of water, 2 cups of quinoa. Give it a quick stir, and I'm going to add in my spices. So salt, about 1.5 teaspoons. And my quinoa spice, about 1 tablespoon. I love it when the spices don't have salt already added, so you can be pretty generous with the flavors and not worry about over salting. I always undersalt when I'm cooking because you can always add more later. Okay, so I got my spice in. Maybe I'll just even add a little bit of oil, not obligatory. It gives it a little bit of flavor as well. And now I'm going to put my lid on, and I am lucky to have a clear lid. And I see it's boiling, so now I'm going to turn it down to a simmer, and I'm going to start a timer. So Mary Tom, will you start me a timer for 12 minutes? Actually, we're just about before, just as class is ending. So now I've got my layered veggie. I could do a kind of like a lasagna with cheese or without. I'm going to add my butternut squash to the next layer. And I'm going to keep the pesto in place. So say I did this pesto rubbed butternut for a previous meal, and I kept a little extra, so I knew I wanted to make this casserole. I'm going to go on a hiking trip, and I want to have something that's easy to pack. It's already in my container and ready to go. So it's a perfect way to start layering in your veggies. I'll put a little bit of my turnips in here. And I'm going to leave it vegan, so I'm not going to put cheese, but I sure could. And here's some parsley. Doesn't really need olive oil, but I certainly could add that too. And I'm ready now for my last layer, so I'm going to put my last strips of the pepper. And again, sofrito could go in this. That's with the tomato. But this one I think will just be without any tomato. And Evelyn, it looks like some of the peel's not coming off. It doesn't come off easily all the time. That's okay. You can leave it. It's kind of like with eggplant. I'm never a fan of taking the peel off if it's intact and it's behaving. But if it's trying to come off anyway, I would just go ahead and take it off. Okay, so there it is. Yummy little layered veggie lasagna. Again, I could sprinkle a little bit of veggie on there on the top, but I'm going to leave it just like that. And as soon as our stuffed peppers are out of the oven, I will put that in and let it warm up so we can all have a sample. Okay, our quinoa is cooking along beautifully. Now I'm going to show you a couple of other ways to do a mix and match with the quinoa. So we've got one that's cooking, or actually two that's cooking, and now we're going to have some cold dishes. And we do this in spades at Powerhouse Bakery. The arugula is a great herb that is nice cold. So we're going to add that into our bowl. And we're going to do kind of a Buddha bowl style. So on this one, I'm going to have the little separate flavors in each corner. So there's my beans. And here's my quinoa. And of course, we always want to think of color when we're creating our beautiful bowls. So I think on this one, I'm going to do a combination of my beets. Beets are dark and they're kind of scary to some people. So I'm going to mix them with my roasted potatoes or the turnips. I'm going to put a little bit of flavor on them. So a little bit of olive oil and a little bit of fresh herbs. Another thing I love to work with in this kind of capacity is rice vinegar. Rice vinegar is the best. It adds a little bit of sweet, a little bit of tangy. But see how pretty those look now? I just dressed them up. A little bit of olive oil, a little bit of herb, and it just looks like it's its own little creation. Of course, I could put my mighty seeds on this too, and it looks so pretty in the bowl. The eyes eat first. So whenever you're creating your bowl, or your Buddha bowl as we call it, we want to have good color, good texture, at least 3 different salads makes it really nice, and then maybe a bed of greens that kind of brings it all together. This could be served with a side of dressing, but it really doesn't need it. I try to convince people that if each flavor stands unique, it's much more enjoyable than if you put a salad dressing on everything and it becomes a homogeneous flavor. Keep them separate and unique, and it's just so good that way. Okay, so one more I'm going to show you. And again, we're going to reapply our butternut. So again, we've got lots of quinoa left over. What else could we do to make it fun and interesting during the week? So I'm going to chop this just like we did in our little lasagna. I'm going to put it in my bowl. If you've never tried pesto on butternut, I introduced this first when I did a cooking class I think Elaine was with you guys, right? Where is Miss Elaine? Yeah, we had a cooking class with you and a couple of the other Thursday Zoom gals, and it was so much fun.
Can you ever put fruit with quinoa?
Yes! Oh, I love that idea, Linda.
Vinegar or something?
I love it. If I had enough room on this table, I would do berries, apples, mint. Oh, right there. Berries, apples, and mint into this little combination. I think that would be lovely. So what I have right now is my slices of the roast butternut. And what I want to do is make a little salad out of my greens. And so I think I'm just going to put it in here. It's actually a little bit better size. So I'm going to add my olive oil, and then I'm going to add my spices. So if you don't already have something like fennel fling or another herb blend, get one, because getting those seeds added in makes such a difference. And now I'm going to change the flavor by adding some of the fresh oregano. And gosh, if I had mint on the table, I would do that too. Don't be afraid to use a couple of different herbs at one time. Makes it really fun. And really a little goes a long way with some herbs. Oregano can sometimes be a little bit pungent. You think so, Seema? Do you use oregano raw? No? Yeah? I love it. Now I'm going to use some fresh ground pepper and some of my ginger lime dressing. So having these dressings around, it makes it such a difference to be able to sort of reintroduce something that you've had earlier in the week. So this is the Suzette. Just a tiny bit there. And then a little bit of the ginger lime. So combining these, this is a very strong flavor. It's got Dijon mustard, some toasted sesame oil, ginger and garlic. So really robust, very similar to a classic French vinaigrette. And then the ginger lime is super light. Honey, ginger, fresh lime juice, that's it. So now I can do a little bit of both. A little cork doesn't want to come out of there. There we go. Just a few drops. Yeah, that's looking beautiful. Yes, I love it. So now I've got some basil, I've got some sesame seeds, and it makes such a beautiful salad. And yeah, finishing off with some fruit would be primo. On the table over here, I've got my fresh citrus. So adding some orange to my little salad would be wonderful. So let's do that. We can, if you had some melon, that would also be really pretty. I like to think of colors, and so orange and the butternut wouldn't be as pretty as perhaps if I thought about getting maybe a honeydew. That would add another color. But adding the citrus definitely is the trick. So citrus or some bright flavors from a melon or even strawberries. Now when I'm cutting off the rind, I'm making it even nicer. So cutting off all the edges. So I just have the really nice little center pieces as part of my salad. I'm going to do a couple more just like that. Mint goes really well with citrus. And it grows so easily, so I'd love to see more mint. All right, now that is going to be a beautiful little salad. We could add nuts on the top as well. Now right now it does have sesame seeds, and it has the hemp hearts and the pine nuts all worked in, but that is a beautiful little salad. And having the single serve containers means that everybody could have their own, or you can make for your own lunches all kinds of things for the week. So it's got oranges, butternut squash, a little bit of arugula, mint, oregano, and the ginger lime dressing and the Suzette. Look how pretty that is. So now we've got 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then just the plain quinoa would be 5 different dishes from our super grain or seed, as the case may be, of quinoa. Let me check and see how our little toaster oven is doing. Remember I'd mentioned before that I love this equipment because it's so versatile. So toaster oven as well as the air fryer, and it has several different trays that come with it. So I've just been so happy with it. Perfect. So there you have it. So adding it plain or adding the beans and the turnips or the roasted potatoes gives it a nice variation, and then finishing it off with a sauce. So now all together we've got, let's see how many. We've got our ratatouille, actually the lasagna. I can't decide what I really want to call it. It's kind of a ragu, I think you might be. But a veggie lasagna. And then we've got our bowl. So the mixed bowl using greens as a base, and then 4 or 5 different roasted vegetables with your quinoa and beans. And remember, we don't have to add beans to quinoa to make it complete. I want to make sure I didn't confuse the issue earlier. There was some concern that maybe it wasn't as high in lysine. Some of the quinoa grown in different places can be low in lysine, but we haven't found that in the most recent research. And then here's this other beautiful little salad where it has the herbs, the butternut, and the fresh oranges. Okay. And our quinoa is just about done. So I think we're looking good. Any questions for me? Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me at Powerhouse Bakery in Meal Prep in Minutes with showcasing quinoa as the super food that it is. We'll see you next time.